Alright, so in this video we're going to cover our assembly process. We want to make this model represent what we're actually going to be building. So if we go to assembly, you notice the menu is a little bit different. We're going to hit insert and it's going to bring up this insert menu. So it can pick parts from your current document, or you can go to other documents in your workspace. So we're going to start with the current document first. So we have one motor plate. So if we click that, come over here and then drop it in. I'm going to have you right click this and hit fix. That means it's going to anchor this down. We can't move this around. That's going to be our anchor point for this model. Then we're going to drop this hex spacer in, and we're just going to drop it in anywhere. We will line that up once we have our motor in. We're going to drop in our square tube, and we have a second square tube as well. So we'll just drop those in for now. While we're adding stuff in, we could do this later, but I'm just going to do it all now while we have the insert menu open. We're going to go to other documents, and now we're going to go find our stock parts. So if we go to FRC Robotics, BHS Robotics, FRC stock parts. So we want 1/2 inch hex collar, and then click on the assembly version. These are the parts that make up the assembly. We want the actual assembly. Actually, I lied. To get the assembly, you have to hit the assemblies, not the part studios. Sometimes the step files can be a little bit wonky. You noticed how when I had this over here, this wasn't mated up properly. So sometimes you have to go edit it on the... When you import a step file from a vendor's website, you have to actually check the step file and make sure that it is mated up properly. As it is, I don't think this... Actually, it's okay. Sometimes when you bring an assembly into from a step file, everything is unmated, so it looks like it's together, but it's actually a bunch of separate parts. Did not mean to go back that far. So if we drill down again, we want one of these 4-inch compliant wheels. We're going to go to assemblies, click this version of it. It's going to think about it. And then we're going to go back. And then let's grab our bag motor. So we'll click that. Go to assemblies. And then click the versaplanetary motor. We'll drop that in. So that's enough importing for now. We're going to hit the green checkbox. So now we have this mess of a bunch of parts here. I'm going to delete that one. I imported too many of those. And if we move them around, they should stay together. I just want to check my assemblies here. Yeah. Because sometimes what happens is, like this screw might be separate. If that's the case, you can drag, click with your left click, drag, so it selects all your items in that model. And then this is the grouping button. It was unnecessary to do that here, but sometimes when you bring in a step file, you'll see like this axle fly out, this motor fall off. So that's just a troubleshooting thing if you're having a problem, if you picked the wrong thing from the insert menu. So now everything can move around except for this plate. And I'm just clicking and dragging these things around. So we're going to now build off of this plate. So to start, let's get these square tubes lined up. So in 3D modeling, when we want to connect stuff, we call it using a mate. So we have mate connectors if you want to get fancy, but for something simple like this, you can use some automatic mate. So you have your planar mate that basically takes a surface. If you click that, it's going to want you to select two items. So if we select the surface of this piece, and then we come over here and rotate to the bottom and select the surface of this piece, and then hit the green check button, it will mate those two surfaces together. So I can still move it, but it looks like it's down, it's separated, but in reality it's actually just, it's moving along the X and Y. It can't go through the Z anymore. So it looks like it's going down, but it's actually just getting moved further away. If that makes sense. It's just moving on that surface. So now we want to lock this down and move it over here. We want to line this hole up with this hole and this hole up with this hole. So we're going to hit the green button over here because we're done with the planar mates. Actually, I lied. I would have hit the X button because now we have a planar mate that has an error. So we're going to delete that. So when you're using the mates feature, it will keep the menu open. You'll see after we do this next one. So we're going to use a cylindrical mate. Click that. It's waiting for you to enter in the values. So we're going to hover over, so we're just selecting this part of the circle. So that part's yellow. Click that. And then we want to do the same for this circle over here. Click that. And it's going to automatically try to generate. Sometimes the preview before you hit this check mark, it's going to look kind of funny. Sometimes it interprets it weird. So hit the green check mark before, judging it and seeing if it has an issue. So that's good. If you notice, it's already making the next mate. Because usually when you're assembling, you have a lot of mates to add to it. So right now we're going to hit X. It's going to take away that red error. And now if we look at this, it looks like it's lined up. But the test is if you can click this and still move it, which we can. See, now it pivots around this point, which we linked up. So that's the only direction it can still move in. It can't move up and down. In this sense, it can't move up and down. It can only spin around. So we just need one more mate, cylindrical. So if we click on the cylindrical one, there, do the same thing, select this surface. And I'm just going to select down here, from here, this one. And now we are good. So now it doesn't move, it's mated up, it's fixed to this. And now we can repeat, that got left over from one of my mistakes from before. Delete those. Hopefully you didn't have that too. Now we're going to repeat this with this square tube. So I'm going to talk through it quickly. Planar mate, select that. So now one thing you want to keep in mind is you want to make sure you're selecting the right surface, because if I were to go from here and up here to the top and then hit the green check mark, notice how it's actually, if I go to the front view, move that guy out of the way. This is the one I just did. Notice how it's going through the plate versus this one's just sitting at the surface, which is what we want. So you could select the wrong side of the surface. So I'm going to go back here, right click, delete that mate, and then you have to kind of move it out of the way a bit, because it's going to auto interpret what you want. sometimes you have to kind of bring the part closer to where you need it to go. So if I retry that now and hit the planar mate and select the right surfaces, so if I want this surface, and if I rotate and I want the under surface of that plate, and then hit the green check mark, I'm going to exit out of the extra mate that it wants me to do. Now if we look at it from the front and zoom in, now they're mated the same. So now we're just going to add some cylindrical mates over here. Cylindrical mate. Select that circle. Select that circle. Hit OK. Since we already have the menu up, we can just continue on. So we're going to hit that circle, and then with the rotate around so we can get the underneath. You can't see what I'm doing here. I'm grabbing the circle from the underside over here, and then hitting the check mark. Notice how it did that weird animation. Sometimes when you start adding mates to it, it's trying to like calculate and predict what you're doing. Until you hit that green check mark, it might not look like it's supposed to. But that's normal with this software. So you hit the X button there to get out of the mate. And we have our motor plate with our metal square tube mounts. So now what we're going to do, same idea with this guy. Now, if you notice, it could be a hit or a miss. If I were to take a planar mate and say, mate this to this, it could either do what I want it to do or flip this upside down and mate upside down. Let me see if it'll do what I'm thinking it's going to do. It's hard to predict this. Okay, this is what I don't want it to do. This is a good example. So it took those surfaces, and since they were kind of perpendicular to each other, it just kind of did a 50-50 guess. This is not how I wanted to mate it. I actually wanted this motor to flip 180 and have it on top of this plate. So I'm going to hit X. And what we're going to do is we're going to rotate this part. So to rotate a part, like an individual part or assembly within the workspace that the assembly workspace you're working in, you can click this and it'll bring up this trident. So you have your move in the X, Y, and Z. That was the Z. This one is the Y. And then you can't really see the X because it's going through the screen, but this is the X. See, and it's going alongside this. Now, along with those arrows, let me give you a better view. If you click this, if you notice, there's these little circles on arc. Those are the rotations. So you can click that and drag it, and it will rotate it around that axis. So right now, we are rotating around the X. This one, it's rotating around the Z. And I'm just using my coordinate system here for reference. And this one's going to rotate around the Y. So, using a combination of those three things, I can rotate this motor to be to where I want it to be on here. So, I want this surface right here on this surface. So what that means is if I click over here, I'm going to click this rotation. I'm going to rotate it a little bit like that. That's good. And then I'm going to rotate that down so at least it's closer to what I want. So this to that surface. So if I click those two things in a mate, planar mate, click here, boom, that's what I wanted. So I'm going to hit check mark. So now, this might give you a better representation. With that one mate, this can move around as if it's sitting on a table, but it can't move up in the air. It looks like it's moving up, but in reality it's still level. It's just going out that way. So now what we want to do is we want to add some cylindrical mates to match this up. Let's go cylindrical. So we'll select this hole. So I'm going, if I look from this view, the bottom left. So it's going to be on the opposite side, because this particular model has holes on this side and the other. So I want it to be the one that's right around here. So if I click here and rotate, this is the hole I want. Hit the check mark. And then that looks pretty good. Now this one might be easier. If you've made a mistake, you can go over here and right click. You can exit out of this and click on your cylinder 5, whatever your latest meat was, and delete it and redo that. But now we still need the second one to tie it down, because this thing rotates. It rotates around that one circle that we did. So we want that to go right there. Sometimes you need to rotate it a little bit just so you can see both the top and bottom hole. Sometimes you need to rotate a little bit just so you can see both. When you go to add the mate, so hit cylindrical, select the one on the motor plate, select the one on the motor, and then it's going to predict that, hit check, and then boom. Now we're going to exit out of the additional mate, and now all of our holes line up on the motor plate. You can see this is the motor plate, that's the motor itself. And then same with our square tube. This is the motor plate up here. It's going all the way through. You can see this, the sky in the back. So we're in good shape. Now with hex parts, it could be a little bit funny. So we're going to move this guy over here. This is our spacer that we made. So if we click him, rotate it. So now what we're going to do is we're going to drop 3 mates on this. Since it's a hex, we're going to use planar mates. So select this surface. Make sure that that circle there is on the middle, not like on the line over here. That's kind of important. Sometimes if you zoom in, it helps to select it. And now we want to pick a surface that's close to it. So if you zoom in over here, this is almost the same orientation as this. So if this one's selected, select this one, it should snap it to that. Now we're still in the planar mate. I'm just going to drag this off a little bit so we can see it better. And then we're going to select this one. You can select whichever one you want. Make sure you're at the center, see it's hovering over the line, that little circle. We want it to be at the center point of that plane. So we're going for that top one. We're going to go for this one over here. So now, if you did that right, you should have the spacer actually on the axle. So now we want this thing to be flushed up over here to the surface. So let's see. See this black circle right here? You're going to click that. That's the part that extends out the most. And then you're going to click on this side of our spacer and then hit the check mark. And that should give us a good spacer. Now we're going to do a similar thing with the wheel and the shaft collar. It should be very similar to that. So I'm moving this wheel over, clicking it, which one is it? It's a combination. It's this guy and this guy. We want to align it as if it's going on. to the axle, then use a planar mate, and then same idea. So click on a surface, find a similar surface, and we're going to need 2 of those. So again, move the wheel off. Let's choose this surface over here. I'm going to choose that surface. I don't think I grabbed it right. There it is. That surface. To that surface. Cool. So now this wheel is in alignment. The only way it can move is on or off. So we want to just fix it down by mating it up to the 3D spacer that we made. And this is the part that extends the most. Now see, it did something funny here. That 3D spacer was already fixed down, but instead it moved the spacer over here. This is the weird animation thing I was talking about, but if I hit the check mark, it's going to move everything down here because that's where everything is fixed to. Like that. So don't be alarmed if it does something weird when you first put the mate on it. Once you hit the green check, it should fix itself. If not, then you have another issue. Now the last step of the assembly is the hex collar. So we'll drag this over here. And again, super similar to what we were doing before. Just click it. Oh, let me exit out of my planar mate. Move that back over. Very similar. We're just going to drop 3 mates on it, and we will have our piece. So we're going to rotate it so as if it's going on. Select some similar surfaces. Just for the sake of selecting the wrong surface, I have this one selected. If I were to, let's say I selected this one, and then I hit the green check, and I drag it out, notice it's not on the axle. What it did was it grabbed that surface and that surface, and it just mated it up. It didn't take the step to rotate it, so I mean, you could have this alongside that surface if this, now everything's orange, if this collar was rotated 180. So that's an example of sometimes when mates, the software is trying to assume what you're doing. You have to kind of think ahead. So if I did want that, say I want to put that surface over here, I think it was this guy that I selected. We'll pretend that's the one I selected. What I would do is rotate this like so. Right, we'll call it roughly there. That way it's closer to, maybe it was that surface, but this is the one I was going to do. So that guy, actually I have to hit the mate first. That guy to this guy. And now it's centered on the axle. So click and drag that off. Click that surface. Click that surface. And then lastly, we're going to click the part that stands out the most, and this collar. It did it again where it brought the whole thing up with it. Hit the green check, and it fixes it. And now you guys have a model. And now if we wanted to, we can go mount this on a robot in another model, and do some testing in 3D space. We could also now make some drawings of the part that we would cut ourselves, which is the square tube. We can send this to a DXF file for the plasma cutter, and we can send this to an STL file for the 3D printer. So I'm going to show a couple more videos on that. For the one that we would send to the, I forget if I just said this, to the shop to be made by ourselves, we would make a drawing out of this first. So that's going to be the next video that we make.